A federal judge in Vermont today ordering the immediate release of Rümeysa Öztürk. She's the Tufts University doctoral student from Turkey, seen here being detained by federal immigration officers back in March. Öztürk has not been charged with any crime and has spent the last 6 weeks in a Louisiana detention center. Her detention, one of several recent high-profile arrests of non-citizen students who participated in protests against the war in Gaza. Our panel is back. Zolan, this caught so much attention because of the nature of this video. Those people that seem to not have what you might expect in terms of a uniform on, identifying who they were, kind of the abrupt way it all happened. According to to our reporting, she has been released on bail here. What do you make of why this judge decided this way? I mean, others have not had successful claims here.
Well, as you said, that she wasn't charged with a crime. She hasn't been charged with a crime. But also the judge had a really striking comment in this, in which he said that the only evidence the government seemed to present was this op-ed that this student wrote here, right? That's exactly the type of thing that comes up when I talk to legal experts about these kind of arrests, that suddenly this immigration crackdown now seems to be infringing on a constitutional right, that being the right to free speech. And at that point, is this a crackdown on immigration, or has it broadened to a crackdown on dissent when it comes to the administration? In other cases, you may have situations where we don't know the details of what people were engaging in these protests and what activity they were in. For this, the only evidence we really have is this written op-ed. And again, to remind people, these arrests are rooted in this obscure law that the administration is using here, where they're arguing that those on a student visa or with a green card, if they're engaging in activity that would undermine U.S. foreign policy, then they can have that status rescinded and then attempt to deport them. That's really broad. Activity that would undermine foreign policy. It really leaves it to the discretion at this point. And here you saw a judge saying, what evidence do you have? Just an op-ed?
Yeah, Chuck, is this just about the fact that the judge was in Vermont here? I mean, one of the things that's defined some of these cases is people fighting for the venue that they're going to be part of, right? Some of these cases for these people who've been sent to Louisiana where it's played out in Louisiana, in this case, this was a judge in Vermont. It's a quite different jurisdiction.
It is, and I think there is some to that, but I think the reason this is where it's at is because of this missing piece of evidence that the government hasn't been able to present, which is what beyond the op-ed, right? And this gets back, it's amazing to me how we have to have a civics lesson here, but it's like the Constitution applies to anybody in the borders, right? And so you have free speech while you're in the United States of America, regardless of whether you're a citizen or not. And it does seem as if the government hasn't said this, but it's coming across as, well, citizens have these rights, but non-citizens don't. And I think ultimately feels as if what's really the under, sort of what's being debated but not being said out loud.
Right. Kate Bedingfield, of course, the president spoke to NBC News about this. Let's watch what both the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, had to say about who's entitled to due process under the Constitution versus what the president said. Watch.
Is everyone on U.S. soil, citizens and non-citizens, entitled to due process?
Yes, of course.
Your Secretary of State says everyone who's here, citizens and non-citizens, deserve due process. Do you agree, Mr. President?
I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know.
I'm not a lawyer. I don't know, he says. But Rubio's clear. I mean, to Chuck's point, citizens, non-citizens,
Yes.
You're here, you're entitled to it.
Rubio's clear, the law is clear, the Constitution is clear. For the president to try to obfuscate and suggest that somehow it's not his obligation and that this isn't a fundamental underpinning and has not been a fundamental underpinning of how our justice system and how civil society in this country has worked essentially since the founding of the nation is absurd. And the facts of this case are frightening. I mean, here, as Zolan was saying, you have somebody who authored an op-ed that essentially the administration didn't like, and then was summarily pulled off the streets and held in confinement. And I think it is hard to look at that and not say this is first of all, this is fundamentally anti-American, and second of all, this is an incredibly slippery slope.
Now, a US federal judge is ordering the immediate release of a Turkish student at Tufts University after she spent 6 weeks in US immigration detention without even being charged. Omar Jimenez is in New York with the details. It feels like she's been punished already because of this extraordinary length of time she's been in detention.
And that was one of the main criticisms in this case. Rümeysa Öztürk, a Tufts University student, also a Turkish national, a doctoral student, and she was detained by immigration enforcement here in the United States, and she's been in detention for now 6 weeks. But the real thing is she has not been charged specifically with any crime. Instead, vaguely, the Trump administration has accused her of participating in activities in support of Hamas. And her attorneys have said this entire time, the only real evidence that the government is using here is that Öztürk was co-authored a campus newspaper op-ed that was critical of Tufts University's response to the war in Gaza, that they couldn't find anything else that the government could possibly be looking at here. I want you to take a listen, though, to one of the attorneys and what she said after we got the ruling that Öztürk would be released.
The government has literally only one single piece of evidence for detaining Rümeysa, and that is the op-ed that she wrote in her student newspaper expressing views that the government disagrees with or dislikes.
So those were the arguments that the attorneys were making, and then today the judge in this case essentially confirmed that, saying there is no evidence here as to the motivation absent the consideration of the op-ed. And her attorneys have said just because you have a political disagreement is not an excuse to hold someone for this long. Now, Öztürk did appear in this case virtually as part of this, but she actually is still being detained in Louisiana. This court hearing happened in Vermont. A previous ruling said she needed to come back, but it shows just how complicated this has all become. And another thing that is very significant about this moment is she is at least the second high-profile non-U.S. either activist or citizen to be released after being put into detention along these grounds of allegedly participating in activities in support of Hamas alleged by the Trump administration. The previous, Moqsim Madawi, a former Columbia University student, he was released last week as well. But these are situations that we have seen play out across the United States where people are swept up, then there are court proceedings to try and figure out, well, what evidence is there actually? And at least in this case, not enough to keep Öztürk detained.